Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Angela Lloyd, and I'm coming to you from Victorville, California. It's the high desert of California, about 100 miles east of LA, and the internet is down. Everybody say, all right. And I have AT&T on my phone, and I'm now convinced that next time Spectrum says, you can have mobile with us, I'm going to say, no, thank you, because then I would be out of luck. So I want to welcome you to our StoryLab. Youth Educators and Storytellers is a special interest group for NSN. And we started up the StoryLabs because of our board members. And one of them is Yasu. I'm going to ask him to wave. Yasu, who is a wonderful theater artist and a magician, he was saying, hey, what if we got together on days other than the pre-conference? And everybody said, absolutely. So we started the happy hours, coffee hours, and the story labs, where we invite people that we would love to spend some time with to join us and offer their expertise and time and skill and their voice. So today we're with Leland Faulkner. And when I asked him for a little known fact, this is what he said. I am Chippewa, and I'm the only indigenous person who was born in Afghanistan. And then there's parentheses that I'm adding. And he said either right now or ever or yesterday. But he does come from Chippewa. It's in his family culture. And he grew up traveling all over. And a little other known fact about him is I've had a bucket list piece myself about going to the Celebration Barn, which was training mime and actors and theater and storytellers. This was 30 years ago. And that is where he started to train when he was 17 with Tony Montanaro. Everybody say Tony's name. Tony Montanaro. And Leland studied with him and traveled with him. And after Tony Montanaro passed away, may his memory be a blessing, Leland Faulkner took over the Celebration Barn and he ran it for 4 years. And it's still running. And I looked at their brochure, and Avner is still teaching comedy and clowning. And there's others. So I'm thinking about it. But in the meantime, can we please celebrate and make Leland welcome to share his gifts with us? Thank you very much.
Yay!
Yay!
Well,
Bravo!
Hello, everyone. Good to see the gallery of faces here. It's so nice. Yes, I still hear Tony's voice every time I walk out on stage. I still feel Tony's presence when I walk out on stage. Now, I was asked recently in an interview called Mime Radio, which is kind of funny. On Mime Radio, they said, "Is there anything that you do before you walk out on stage?" And yes, there is. And it was something that Tony taught me, or Tony revealed to me, I should say. And that's that when he first walked out, just before he walked out and saw the audience, he would just imagine them all standing up like this and applauding him. And so he envisioned the end of the show at the beginning.
Nice.
And you know what? Almost every time I ever worked with him, it's exactly how the show ended up. And yeah, besides Tony being a fantastic performer, he was a very spiritual guy. And a lot of those elements are part and parcel of the way he performed. The spiritual elements are just as important as any technical elements. And I want to just reiterate that, because I'm going to share a lot of technical things with you guys today. And if I could make sure, Angela, that you sort of keep me on track time-wise, that would be great. At least give me a 15-minute heads up before we reach the end of time, because I tend to get wrapped up in things that we're talking about or doing.
That reminds me, would you like to answer some questions at the end of your time?
Sure. We can also do this. We can also do things a little informally here. You know,
okay.
When I'm working on a specific subject and you have real questions, you can either put something in the chat, raise your hand if you're muted, and then I'll have Angela, you know, sort of mediate for us.
Okay, that would be great. Good. And in the meantime, you want 15 minutes before the end of the hour to give you a clue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, Leland.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I want to say this to begin with. Dreaming is one of the most important things. One of the things that Tony taught us is all about the atmosphere and premise. And that's another phrasing for dreaming. And among Native Americans, of course, dreams are very defining. They're your guide, they're your insight, they're your ally for the most part. And in Jungian psychology, dreams are how your unconscious speaks to you, right? So it tells you about yourself. So I love to track my dreams, my sleeping dreams. And I often think of performing as lucid dreaming with your body on. If you ever felt a sort of trance state when you're performing, and when it's all done, you go, wow, this is what I'm talking about. I've had true trance states where I actually was lost in the characters I'd created. But those happen very few and far between. And I talked to my friend Justine Fixel when we were teaching together at Celebration Bar, and I told her about these experiences that I had, and she explained it like this. She said, oh, you met the archetype. And I'll explain what those instances were, first of all, because this is sort of like the edge, the edge that actors, you know, walk sometimes when they're working characters or they're working the dream. And the first time I was alone at midnight in a little mime studio in Kansas City. I'd been making masks, celastic masks on molds. And I had found this old Mexican mask, and I didn't like it very much, but I loved the horns that were on it. And so I took the horns. I'd made this neutral mask, and I put a neutral mask has no expression. It's like an everyman sort of thing. But I cut the mouth out, so the mouth had articulation. And I put the horns on it, these goat horns, and I rolled up my pant leg, right? And I put the mask on, and I went out into the studio where we had these big mirrors, and I went like this with my hands, and I went like this, and I started walking around at midnight by myself in the studio, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and then the character in the mirror looked back at me, and it freaked me out. It was the other on the other side. I had to rip the mask off. I had to I locked the studio and I was out of there. It scared me. I'd met my own shadow, right? And the second time I had this experience, well, I had a few other times, but the most extreme were these two. And the second time I was improvising in the barn, in the attic of the barn with two friends, improvising. And somehow the improvisation became that I was a werewolf. And they had captured me, and they were holding me down and trying to tie me up, and I'm howling, and I look out the window, and there's a full moon shining down on me, and everything became too real at that moment. And I said, "Stop! Stop! 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 Stop!" But they wouldn't stop; they kept going, and I said, "Stop it!" Finally, they did stop, and my heart was racing. I'd gone into that archetype. And I felt lost there. And, and it took me that moment to recenter myself. Now, there are more subtle versions too. When I was first working on a character of a mad scientist that I was doing, I would just let the character completely take over so that I really embodied it. And I remember I was doing this thing with cigarettes where he was trying to lecture and he was trying to smoke, but he couldn't. His hands were shaking because he was insane. And the cigarettes just fell out all over the floor. He was trying to pick them up and they kept falling and someone in the audience yells out, "That's a nasty habit." And my character goes like this, "And so's your wife!" And the audience roared. The audience roared. And it didn't come out of me. It came out of the character. The character was speaking. The thing had possessed me. It had a much snappier response than I would ever have. And when I worked with Keith Johnstone, the famous improvisation teacher, he talks about that. You know, if you have to trust your intuitive part. You have to trust your intuitive part and give it its head and not let your thinking get in the way of the soul of the character. Because if you think too much and you try to be too clever, things fall flat or they don't feel full or they don't feel authentic. And if you're looking for authenticity, if you're looking for believability, if you're looking for spontaneity, if you're looking for those things and you want them in your work, you have to get out of the way and let your unconscious go to work. You have to get out of the way of your own unconscious. And our conscious self thinks it's very clever. It wants to control moment-to-moment things. And maybe when you're first doing your research, maybe when you're first crafting a piece, you want to like really craft this moment, that moment, this moment. But then when you've actually evolved the characters in the piece, or you've actually evolved the story to a point where you're not trying to remember words, you're not trying to remember choreography, you're just trying to be, you're trying to do that lucid dreaming. If you start to think too much, you step out of the moment and it becomes obvious to the audience. The audience sees everything. They see everything. And this is one reason why the dreaming element is so important. One of the premise things that we would always do, I say premise, but that's what I want to talk about, is premise. I want to talk about premise. I want to talk about visualization. I want to talk about atmosphere. So to start with, what is the atmosphere of the piece that you're doing? What atmosphere do you want to create for your audience? So in order to do that, we would explore. We would be in studio and we would simply feel the atmosphere. Feel the atmosphere. We wouldn't move. We would just feel it, visualize it. So say, for example, I wanted to visualize being in a storm, and I'm just making this up as we're talking. Okay, I want to be in a storm. First, I just start dreaming about it, hearing it, smelling it. I don't do anything but that. I just simply get in there and I try to buy the atmosphere. Now, if you buy the atmosphere, by buying it, I mean you just commit to it emotionally, physically, spiritually. You commit to your atmosphere. It's going to transform the way you move automatically. So then you let this, whatever it is, be inside you. And suddenly, whatever you do is going to be right. Whatever the next move that comes to you is going to be right. Now, when you're developing the story and you're trying to develop the character and the atmosphere, atmospheres, they really come early on, because that's the environment where everything's going to happen, right? So the atmospheres come early on. You have to really explore the details and the world of your story. And a lot of storytellers, they work in this frame, and I want to talk about the frame too. They work in this frame virtually. They work from like the waist up. But because you're from the waist up, that doesn't mean you don't have animation. There's all kinds of animation that can happen here. All kinds of things that can happen in this frame. You don't have to be full-bodied and do things that large. But even if you're working small like this in this frame, you have a whole range of things that are available to you. And I don't know how many of you do virtual shows, but through the pandemic, it's become a major part of my income. And so there are a few tips about working the emotion and the choreography for the frame. The world of theater and the rules of theater actually defined the first rules of filmmaking. They treated the camera frame like a stage. So, the actors would exit, the actors would enter, it was like trying to duplicate what was happening on stage. And it's interesting now here in the millennial period, it's the reverse. Now we imitate film. We can because it's so part of our lexicon, so much a part of our lexicon as a culture. You can do things like you can compress time the way they do in film. For example, he ran and he ran and he ran. You just compress time. He's run for miles. So this language of the camera is really useful to know. Another example of this frame, I'm going to talk about Delsarte in a minute, but first I want to talk about this camera frame. This camera frame lets you be very, very personal and very, very epic. You have the full range, and a lot of that has to do with your distance from the lens. So if you're trying to do something where he stood on the cliff looking at the sunrise, here we are, this sort of epic frame where I'm full-bodied. But as he looked down into the village, he could see his wife and daughter playing in the field. And then it becomes very intimate, see? And the closer you get to the lens, the more and more intimate it gets. The camera is like God in a way. When you start moving the camera around, the camera can be anywhere, can see anything, like God. And then the other thing I want to talk about is the placement of your camera, whether it's high or whether it's low. So we talk about this we're talking about dimensions here. So we're talking about this dimension going forward and back. And now let's talk a little bit about height, elevation. So if my camera right now is just barely above eye level. That puts us like on the same plane, right? And it feels kind of natural. If I change the camera angle and I put myself, so that you are above me, that's a whole other psychology there. I've got a green screen, so the background isn't shifting, but it's a whole other psychology. If the camera frame is high, because now the camera is looking down, so it's much more of an observer or even a voyeur. If the camera is below, looking up, the person sort of dominates the frame. They dominate the viewer, right? In a way that also reveals status. You'll see it if you look at hearing this, you look at films from now on, you'll see how that's used all the time. So I just thought those were interesting bits of knowledge for people who do Zoom shows to take advantage of. Foreshortening, this whole foreshortening into the lens is very, very useful. Using the frame to surprise, simply. It can be entertaining. If you're static in the frame, we get used to things, and it's like language. If a speaker has the same rhythm that goes on and on and on without variation, it wears on us. So we need the surprise, and we need not just the verbal surprise, but the visual surprise element as well. Our job, as far as I'm concerned, is to fulfill the audience expectation. And Keith said to me, it's excellent to fulfill the audience expectation, but it's even better if you can over-fulfill it. So if you can exceed their expectation, it's glorious. So give them what they want, basically, and give them more than they were expecting. See, let's talk about the frame, talk about that. I'm going to start talking a little bit about Delsarte right now and the way that we move. And this is whether you move on stage or whether you move for the camera. The laws apply across the board. Delsarte, I'm going to give you a quick history of Delsarte and why he's so misunderstood and why people are misguided or they don't know about him. But let me start by saying he was one of the most famous people of the 1800s. People used his name all over Europe to create commercial products so they would sell more. They used his name to sell Delsarte wooden legs, Delsarte shoes, Delsarte corsets, things that would turn us into ideal human beings, right? Delsarte was the first. He wanted to be an opera singer, but he was also the first to create a science-based approach to gesture and attitudes of the body. The first to really go at it systematically. It begins with trinities, and it starts with the trinity of mental, physical, and emotional. And emotional, that's a difficult word because it could also mean aesthetic or spiritual. Right? You understand? So emotional can be aesthetic and spiritual as well. So basically, he broke the body down into these three elements of mental, emotional, and physical. And your body has trinities in every part of it. On the grand scale, if I step back here, you'll see that my head is like the mental computer center. This is the most mental place on my body. My heart, my lungs, and my neck, these are the most emotional parts of my body. And my core, this is the most physical part of my body. Make sense so far? That's like the grand scale. Now, if you start breaking things down, you look at like the arm. Here's the arm. The bicep here, this is the most physical part of the arm. The forearm, here's the most emotional part of the arm. The hand, it's the most mental part of the arm. The same applies to the leg. You look at the leg. This is the strongest part of your leg up here. right? The thigh, connected to one of the biggest muscles in your body that moves you around the planet. You have this strong muscled part of the leg. Then you have this part of the leg, the calf. And, ballet dancers, for example, are taught to turn out, to accent this part of the leg. Women have been guided into wearing high heels, I think, mostly by men, to, among other things, to keep them from running away, right? It goes back to a little bit like foot binding, to keep them from running away so that they're a little defenseless, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then there's also this this idea that when you're elevated up on the balls of your feet, you have to walk like this. Let me back up a little bit here. You have to walk like this, right? And when you walk like this, you have to thrust your hips forward a little bit, and you have to accent your calf. It's accented. It's like turned out a little bit, right? In order to walk like that. And so it's more aesthetic. It accents the aesthetic part of the leg. It also makes you emotionally vulnerable, right? Therefore, an easy catch. She can't run away. The fingers, the hands. Let's talk about those for a minute. Now, the hand is what got Delsarte started on this whole idea of how the body communicates. And I know if this is getting too heady for you, just let me know. But it's always been really informative for me throughout my career to take this work, use it in the studio. I forget about it when I'm performing. When I'm performing, I don't say, oh, now I'm going to put my emotional part forward, No, I do all that in the studio before I go on stage. That is all in automatic by the time I walk out. I've made those decisions. And that's the important thing. A lot of this is about making choices and decisions about your characters, your atmospheres, the reality you're trying to create. You have to make lots of choices and decisions. So the hand started Delsarte on his journey because he wanted to be an opera singer, right? And he had an incredible penchant for music. When he was a little boy, he was scrabbling in the dirt, in the sand, as a band went by, right? And he'd never studied music of any kind, but he scrabbled things in the dirt. And one of the most famous music teachers in Paris saw him and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm writing down the music." He says, "Really? Show me." And so he repeated, by reading the signs that he had done in the sand, the music that had just passed by. He goes, "All right, young man, come to my atelier tomorrow," right? And he invited him to come and study music. And he became a wonderful musician, playing piano, singing, but he wanted to be an opera singer. And soon he had exceeded his own teacher, right? And so he went to this school of voice, that school of voice, yet another school of voice, the Beaux-Arts school. Each one had a different approach. That, no, this is the way you do it. No, that's the way you do it. No, this is the way. Now, well, he followed all these directions and eventually completely lost his voice. His ability to become a singer, an opera singer, was dashed. His hopes were dashed. And because he was so depressed and he couldn't find any work, he took a job working in a hospital with the terminally ill. And one of the first things he was sent to do was to go down into the morgue in the basement and get certain things. And when he went down there, he was just disgusted by the corpses that littered the basement of this hospital. This is the turn of the century, you understand. And but he said in his writing, he says that after a while, my point of view became very clinical, and I could see things the way the doctors saw things. And I was no longer apprehensive and fearful. And he would go down and he would start observing things. And the thing that he observed first was the thumb. The thumb. He noticed that all these corpses, their thumbs were withdrawn into the palms of their hand like this. He goes, huh. It's like if you give up your will, right? It's like he started to think about the thumb. You know, when we want to give somebody a big affirmative gesture, right? Thumbs up, right? Or when Nero wanted to feed the Christians to the lions, thumbs down. The thumb. He called it a thermometer of the will, a thermometer. So the more expressive the thumb was, the more vital the expression was. And he went out into a park to test his theory. And he cut holes in a newspaper in the photogravure. Right? He cut holes so that people wouldn't know that he was observing them, you know, a blind study sort of. And so he would observe that the mothers and the nursemaids treated the children differently. The nursemaids, when they picked up a child, they'd go like this, grab the child, pull it to their hip like this, right? And you see where the thumbs are? You see where the child is. Well, a mother did it completely differently. The mother would extend her thumbs towards the child and pull the child directly to her heart. And he goes, ah. And that's how he started his whole approach and methodology. The hand now. The feet, the head, these things at the periphery of the body, these are the mental centers. They come in contact with the world first. They give that mental information to the rest of the body and to the heart and everything else. Right? It's information-based and it's language-based in a way. Think about this. My hands, they can do words, right? It's hard to do that with other parts of your body, except for maybe your eyebrows, which we'll talk about that in a moment. Look at my face. From above my eyes, from here to here, this is mental. Look. You're making comments. The eyebrows, you know, it's like words, it's like language. It's intellectual. It's puzzling, you know. So the eyebrows have a language, hands have a language, and the feet are the smartest part of the body, right? And you know, you talk about tap dancers, they have some smart feet. But the feet also talk. If you're at a party and someone is talking to you, and they're talking to you like this, it means one of two things. Either they want to go that direction, right? Or if you're lucky, they prefer talking to you, right? This is sort of foundational stuff. This is very foundational. Once you start seeing this, you see it everywhere. You see it in everyone. You start noticing that there are people walking around who are very mental in the way that they move. They lead with their head. They discuss things with their hands. Other people are more emotional. Like they work this torso here. They work the forearms. They work the calf more, right? Ballet dancers are really taught to accent that. The fops of the 18th century. They move, you know, elegant, the posture of elegance, the faux posture of elegance. A A construction worker would be completely different. They're working from their core. They're working from their biceps. They're working from their lips, which is the most physical part of the mouth. Here, look, this is the most emotional. The eyes and nose, this is the most emotional. The emotions in the face really center around the eyes and nose. The mouth, it's very physical. Look at this. Cover my mouth, you can see. That tongue is one of the strongest muscles on your body. Did you know that? The tongue? So you have to make all of these things work for you. I was going to show you physical, like in a construction worker. So I get this feeling here, right? I'll give myself a broader base so that my core is like part of the base, and that my thighs are working a little bit. When I move, I'll move from here. As opposed to so
Do you mind moving back?
Do
you mind moving back
Sure.
and show us your feet? I'll tell you when we
Sure.
can see them. Keep going back.
Sure. It's you know, the three differences, this sort of thing, this intellectual thing where that's mental, and then you have that very physical one. And you see it in the animal world as well. Apes, for example, very much move from the physical centers, right? They don't have the intellectual ability that human beings have, for example. In fact, to do the ape, I always think of like removing the top of my forehead a little bit. So when a monkey grabs a banana, like this, and it gets distracted, it'll just carry the banana with it. A human being doesn't do that. A human being has this whole other way of operating, which uses their intellectual ability. The ape doesn't have that. So you start to find these sort of definitions of movement that will help you really create a character that has deep qualities, and the audience won't necessarily know how you're doing it. When I first watched Tony Montanaro transforming in front of me, I was going, how are you doing that? How do you change like that? This is the secret. This is what he was doing. This is how he could become an old Italian. This is how he could become a young fishwife. This is how he could become all the characters that he would portray. He was using Del Sarte's approach and thought on creating attitude and gesture. So let me get you up on your feet for a moment, and let's just try something very simple. And this is, if you do any period characters, for example, this is excellent to know, because this shows status. Now, status is very mystical to some people, but it's not really. It's just who has the most authority? Sometimes it's the person with the lowest position who can have the most authority. But if you go to the ideal level, I'm going to teach you how to bow. This is called the ideal bow. And this is Delsarte. And this was an exercise created by Genevieve Stebbins. And Genevieve was one of the few people who actually wrote down Delsarte's theories on paper. She was his student. And Delsarte never wrote anything himself. Everything in his work was written by others. Isn't that astounding? He never wrote it himself, but he was considered one of the greatest scientists in the study of gesture. Groundbreaking, a genius. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to bow. Now, the first bow, first think of yourself as getting very tall, and the back of your head sort of goes forward and up, and that will extend your spine if you think like that. Just forward and up with the back of your head. Now you're as tall as you can be. What you're going to do is you're going to draw a circle with your nose using just your head. Now realize that your head only moves here. It doesn't include the neck. It's just the head. So draw a circle with your nose. Very small gesture. See that? That gesture is someone of high status. If you're in the presence of the king and you go like this, my lord, you have a very high status in the court, right? Now let's go a little bit farther. Now you'll use the neck, so it's going to be head and neck. That might be someone on the second tier in the court. My lord. Now, if you include head, neck, and chest, look what happens. Now you start dropping in status. My king. My king. And if I use my waist, now my status drops even more. First with the head, neck, chest, and waist. My lord and master. You're lowering your elevation each time more and more, you see. Now, let's go one more. This time you're going to include your hips. And this is a big movement, so it's going to take you way back, way forward like this. And you make a big circle with your nose, the biggest circle that you can possibly make with your nose. And in the court, that would be all the others. And the only way you get lower, right, is to get down on your knees. And be completely humble and completely zero in status. And that's the level of bows. That's a wonderful exercise created by Genevieve Stebbins. Now, I don't know
Leland,
if you're going to bow. Yes.
I just want to let you know it's about quarter of 10 minutes to the hour, but this is a 90-minute session. So we go till an hour and a half. Did you know that?
Okay.
This is a test.
Yes, that's great.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
A lot to share with you and a lot to say.
Thank you.
So I talked to you a little bit about premise, about dreams, about animals, and I talked to you now about Delsarte and how Delsarte broke the body down into these centers. And so when you're working characters now, discover for yourself what character, what the characters' centers are. Are they emotional, more emotional? Are they more physical? Are they more mental characters? And then the other thing I want you to consider, because of my Native American background, consider the animal that they are. What animal your character might inhabit. How do they move? Do they move like a fox? Do they move like a squirrel? Or like a beaver? What is the character of the animal? Are they elephants? And try to embody the spirit of the character that way. And what I've discovered is that the more you can delineate the difference between characters in your stories, the more alive it becomes. And the more fastly you are at transforming from one character to the other, the more fun it becomes. An audience is always waiting. They're waiting to see the actors transform. They're just waiting for that. And when it happens, it satisfies something. It just satisfies something in an audience to see the actor transform. We put such strictures on ourselves. One thing that these exercises do, it opens up a world that sort of justifies our thinking about movement so that we can start incorporating movement more. I've never felt so free as I have in this time in my life. And probably from the accumulation of all the past work, and also from the stricture of the pandemic and the need to create new stuff all the time and not caring anymore. This part of me that used to say, oh, well, that might not be that voice is gone for me now. And I want to find a way to express myself to the fullest, not partly, not a little bit of myself, but to the fullest. That's what being an artist is for me. You want to express yourself to the fullest, and that means movement. Everything moves. Everything moves, even your heart. Boom, 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 it's beating right now. You try to stand still, you're still moving, making 1,000 incremental, corrections with your feet. Things that you learned since you were a baby and first learned to walk. You're making those incremental corrections all the time. As a baby, you'd fall on your butt, you'd fall on your face until finally, you found a place where you were sort of balanced, and you fell and it became walking, and then standing still now, you're making all those same corrections, but as an adult, they're very microscopic. And you look like you're standing still, but you're not. You're moving all the time. I want to talk about, I talked about creating environment. I talked about creating character. These are huge realms, by the way. We could do a week on each one of these subjects, a week of exploring each one of these subjects. But I'm trying to give you a big, broad survey of the power, and hopefully you'll start to incorporate just at least some of the ideas a little bit into your work. Or it might give you a little insight into what you're doing and why something works that you didn't have before. So that's why I share all of this background and foundation stuff with you. I want to talk now about mime and the techniques in the realm of mime and the use of graphics. I've talked about the use of gesture. There's so many laws. So many ideas. It's a whole realm. I'm going to share some of them with you. But what I really want, and what I'm always searching for, is whether you're using your voice or whether you're using movement, what makes what you're doing authentic? What really moves the human heart about what you're doing? So let me just share something with you that I shared with a friend of mine, and he just thought it was the epitome of authenticity. This is, I'm going to do a share screen. This is a 12-year-old, a Cree Native American kid. And I'm just going to share this with you. It's very short. And he's singing an original song that he made up. And it's in honor of the missing and murdered Indigenous women. Can you hear this? You can't hear
No, not yet.
And you can't hear the audio on this, right?
Not yet.
Okay, well, look at his body right now.
Mm-hmm.
Leland, on the screen, the sound is muted. If you click on the icon of the sound, it might come on.
what I'm referring to about authenticity. Obviously, coming from his gut. Obviously, coming from himself, the whole creation of the song, the sharing of the song. He wasn't holding back, and he wasn't being intellectual about it. The kid was just putting it all out there for everyone to see. I long for that moment myself. I long for being able to put myself out there and just let the chips fall where they may. Nothing was so satisfying for me as my last tour out in California. I've created a show called Walker Between Worlds. And you can see parts of it online if you want to. It's at the Marsh Theater on their website, at the Marsh Theater out of San Francisco. They invited me to perform indigenous stories for their Marsh Stream series during the pandemic. So I created a whole new show, and then I created a second show with 2 new pieces, one a pantomime piece without words, and the other a spoken word piece of poetry. And the thing about this tour that was so different from other tours is that I didn't hold back at all. And the audience, I had worked it all out here, like in the Zoom space, right, for the Marsh stream, and this was the first time I had live audiences, middle schoolers, and I played some music at the very, very beginning, and I just couldn't help myself when I played the music. You know, I had to move. I had to move. I'd hear the music and I had to move. So as the kids were coming in, I was moving. And I kind of like felt the archetype working in me. So soon I was exploring things. I was exploring hunting, tracking, following, seeing. And it became electric as the kids came in. At one school, these girls hopped up and wanted to dance with me, and I invited them in, so I was improvising, showing them, you know, let's track, you know. So we were all dancing together without a word being spoken. They all wanted to. They were in it from the very beginning. So the atmosphere, the world was set up. And that happened organically. So what I'm saying is don't hold back. Really, don't hold back. Life is short. Why are we holding back? We've cut ourselves off at the knees, right? So put those knees back on and kick it. And I mean that literally. I've had both of my knees replaced. I now have titanium knees. So for me, it's also a little bit of a celebration of still being able to move.
Leland?
Yes.
This is Eldrina Duma. I come from the Pueblo people of Arizona and New Mexico.
Yes.
You know, it's very interesting what you're saying and what you're speaking, because before I became a professional storyteller, one of the things that I knew I did at home with my children is I changed my voice. I would change my gestures and my whole body, facial expressions, and even my body. It was so natural for me to do that. But step outside of that and become a professional storyteller, and I am writing stories about animals, and I am telling the old stories about the animals. And when I come inside and I am by myself, the animals come alive in me. But they are very shy when it comes to being presented publicly. It's almost like, I don't know how to get, and I desire to do that. I just don't know how to get out of that comfort zone of what I really want to do with this story, and how I want my body to come alive through those stories. And I don't know if it's just my background and, the storytellers that I remembered sitting around the table. We always just sat around and we would listen and we would laugh, and, no one really used their voice or their body movement or anything, kind of very, almost very serious. And of course there was laughter in it, and humorous stuff. And we did, but there was no acting out of the story. And so maybe in my head, I'm trying to deal with two different things that are within me: the traditional,
two different worlds,
and the one that wants to come alive in front of my audience. And I don't know how to get to that point.
Well, here's what I would respond to you, how I would respond. I'd say, one of the greatest traditions in Native America is creativity, to be creative. And if you are truly coming from, the spiritual center of what you're doing, you can't make a wrong move, no matter how big or how small it is. My teacher, Tony, has a wonderful thing that I always bring up that he said, and it's that inspiration doesn't tell you, don't do this or don't do that. Instead, it provides alternatives. Comprehend that? You have an alternative. If something is telling you don't do this or don't do that, you can rest assured pretty much that it's an imposter. And it took me, as a Native American, as a member of the Bad River Band, it took me until now in my 60s to embrace it and bring it out and let myself play in that realm. It took until now, because I lived overseas. I lived in Afghanistan. I lived in Iran. I lived in Africa. But but if you look, there's so many things that are the same among the indigenous people in all these cultures. And like the Kalahari Bushmen, when they tell stories, even though they're just sitting by the fire talking to somebody, which would be like across the table, right? They still, they embody the giraffe, as they talk about it. It becomes one with them. They don't just talk about it. They become the giraffe, You see it come alive in the story. And people are afraid of being spotlighted. And how that happens is through education and through culture, and through the use of fear, negative training. Keith, my friend Keith Johnstone, talks about this all the time. How we've been sort of culturally trained to be afraid, and we're trained through negative response. Don't do that. What the hell do you think you're doing? That's not right. Get out. You don't belong here. It's more that imposter syndrome, you know. You shouldn't really be doing that because you don't have the right. Right? It's this imposter syndrome. Step into your power, you know, and don't be afraid to be an original. Don't be afraid to be the first Native American who said, "This is how you do a bear." Right? Don't be afraid to act out. And all your life, people are saying, "Don't act out. Why are you being so loud? Children should be seen and not heard." Right? Keith said that he stopped thinking about kids as immature adults, and that he started thinking of them instead as atrophied adults, as atrophied children. We've been educated out of our ability to express. When you're a kid and you go out and you play, you don't hold back, right? I am king of this mountain. You know, you don't hold back. You don't say, I think I'm the king of this mountain. Where's the fun in that?
I feel like a word of Leland, I feel like a word that like a good job, that is such a bad word for art education, because art doesn't have good way of expressing, like what you're saying. There's no good and bad, right? There's, like, as you were saying, there's 100 ways to express, but like we always say to the kids, good job being Peter Pan, good job being mermaid, or like there's one good way, as you know, if you go to school and then taught art, you know. And I always felt,
no, of course, there's an infinite, creativity is completely infinite, but Keith had a great exercise, and I did this with high school students just last week, and they loved it. They loved it. They started. It changed the way they were thinking. It's dolphin training. Have you heard about this? Dolphin training. You know, anybody have a pet dog, like a dog?
Yes.
Yeah. So so you know, some people here in Maine, they abuse their animals in order to get them to do what they want. You know, they'll sit down, stop that, and and the dog will do it, but it'll do it shaking. You know, it'll do it eventually if they keep beating it enough. But I've trained my dog, right, to sit pretty, to stand up, to spin around with a tutu on, to walk. It'll crawl on the floor through rewards. And that's how they train dolphins, with fish, right? The new dolphin at SeaWorld comes, right? The trainer comes out, has the fish, throws it in the water. Dolphin goes, oh, fish, fish. Next day, trainer comes out, got his fish, holds it a little bit above the water. Dolphin sticks its nose out of the water, fish, right? Day 3, a little bit higher. Dolphin comes out, a little bit higher. By the end of the week, the dolphin's coming out standing on its tail. Maybe the next time they get it to like move, and then finally maybe do a leap, maybe do a flip. Then they bring another dolphin out, train it to do the same thing. They start doing them together. Suddenly there's a whole act at SeaWorld, right? 3 dolphins doing a ballet. Well, our actors, storytellers, mimes, are we any different? When we get our fish?
Nope, absolutely not.
You know, when we get the fish, we give the audience what they want. We oh yes, oh good, they liked it. You know, that's our fish. And as I said before, when you satisfy an audience's expectation, it's good. If you over-satisfy it, it's even better. So if you give them more than they were expecting, it's even better. Of course, you have to know your audience. As I said before, sometimes you're playing to an intimate space, so you're not going to do things that you do in the ring of a circus. You'll scale things down. You have to know how to scale your performance for the situation you're in. When I was doing the schools out in California, they were all outdoor performances. And they were like scattered under this tree here, that tree there, this little piece of shade there. And I had to play to all of that. So things had to be bigger than life. But if I'm in a single classroom, I'm not going to play it to the same scale, right? It'll scale down just enough to be appropriate for the space. That doesn't mean it's less expressive.
Yeah.
See, when the camera gets really close, by the way, it's like this. Even the raised eyebrow fills the screen. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you learn over it with the experience I've had, and I've worked circuses, by the way, where there are 4,000 people. I worked a circus in Russia with 4,000 people. 2 performances. Flew me all the way out to Russia to do 2 performances of my hand shadow act in a circus ring. A ring of thousands of people. It was unbelievable. You scale things there differently. Even your bow. I had to run out to the ring, run the circle of the ring, thank everybody, in the whole ring, and take my bow and exit. It wasn't like, it was completely different than the theater where you come out and you go, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's a completely different way. So scaling, knowing how to scale so it's appropriate for your venue and your audience, that's important. It's important, but it doesn't cut down on your expression. Right? It doesn't cut down on your expression. I live to fully express myself now. I don't know why else I'm on the planet, to tell you the truth.
I'll take this opportunity to, Leland, I'll just take this opportunity to say you have about 17 minutes.
Oh, okay.
A little more than 15.
All right. So, I love Del Sart. I want to talk about one thing very quickly for you. If you're ever wondering what to do at a given moment, what should I do with my hands, for example, here? How do I express what I'm trying to say with my hands, for example? There's a wonderful way to figure that out. If you could imagine, for example, a cube in front of you, right? A 3-dimensional cube with front, side, top, bottom, etc. If you imagine the cube in front of you, this is a rejection. When you touch the back of the cube like this, you reject, right? If you put your hand in the front, you contain. You contain, you embrace, right? Also containing on the side. Here you bless and suppress. Here you lift. You're uplifting. It's an interesting thing. I saw there's a famous actor. His name is escaping me right now, but he would close his show. At the end of his show, he'd take his bow like this. He'd go, and because he went like this, the audience felt compelled to stand up.
That's so good.
Because he went like this. It was like casting a magic spell on them, right? Internally, he's going, stand up, stand up, stand up. And guess what? They would stand up. I wanted to talk a little bit very quickly about mime and graphics before we run out of time. The use of the isolation and the separation when you're handling objects is important. It's important for storytellers. It helps you create a reality. It helps you create clarity. Clarity is key. Having good mime technique doesn't mean you're not a storyteller. It just means you have physical eloquence, that you have clarity of movement, and people understand you well. When you pick things up, you have to understand their density. It could be a glass of water, it can be a box, right? Let's, for example, if you say a box, you reach down to pick up a box, right? Go like this, there's nothing in it. It's very light, right? If I go like this, and my hand isolates, and I have to bend my elbow a little bit, there's resistance. Now there's a little something in the box, and I counterbalance, right? Now, let's say I really want it to be quite heavy. I'll reach down, pick it up by the handle maybe, like a heavy briefcase filled with gold bricks. Now I really have to counterbalance like this, and there's going to be density because it's slower, right? That gives the idea that it's heavier if I move slower. In fact, look at this. The slower I move, the heavier the object is. Right? So the idea of giving something density is important. If you pick up a glass of water, does it have anything in it? If it does, you have to treat it a little differently. You have to give it a little more care, a little more weight. There'll be more resistance when you take it off. If it's empty when you take it off, there's no resistance, there's no weight, there's no mass. It's like science. But you have to see it, you have to visualize it, know what you're handling and know what you're touching. An isolation is when one part of your body stays still and the rest of your body moves. You can do it with almost any part of your body. Most commonly, you've seen it probably like this, right? Now, my mentor, Tony Montanaro, he's the guy who invented this illusion, right? He invented the wall. He was improvising with Carlo Mazzone Clemente, and he was pretending to be in a barrel. And Carlo goes, "Do that again, do that again." "You mean this?" "Yes, I saw it, I saw it." And then the illusion was born. Tony is the one who created the whole cliche pantomime about the room getting smaller and smaller. That's Tony. He created that. Somebody has to create these things. Then 1,000 other people imitate them, but you can't take away the creation from the creator. That's just a thing, right?
I thought Marcel Marceau created that box.
Marcel Marceau saw Tony do this on stage at the Gramercy Arts Theater when Tony was performing on Broadway. And 2 weeks later, Marcel Marceau, instead of having a room that got smaller and smaller, had created a sketch called The Cage, where a cage got smaller and smaller.
Okay. Thank you.
It's like saying Michael Jackson invented the moonwalk. But no. Jean-Louis Barrault, Etienne Decroux, two Frenchmen working in a little studio outside of Paris. They created the walk, the pressure walk. They created all those things that are now part of the hip-hop lexicon. All these things have a root in the history, but just like, like many things, like land for Native Americans, things get appropriated and just taken. And one of the things I like to do is to make sure people understand the history of these things, where they've been taken from. The isolation, if you want to practice it, you go like this. You imagine that there's two lines. Where they intersect, you put your hand on it. Now your hand stays still as you move your body forward and back, as you move your body left, as you move your body right. Now, this is just a drill, right? This is just a drill. This is just a drill. But doing this drill gives your body this vocabulary, which now lets you do things like you can grab a door handle, right? And now people will see the door. Being able to illustrate little moments, have little bits of business in your stories, opening a window. They start to see it in their imagination. So these little bits of business add this element of imagination and this element of dream to what you're doing, which is really important. I improvised a little scene for my Dreamcatcher story, because my people, the Chippewa, they created the Dreamcatcher, and they have a spider story about the creation of the dream catcher. And in it, I read that the children were having nightmares. And I had to research thousands of different bits and pieces and cobbled them all together to actually create the full story from different sources. It was quite a journey to pull the story together. It's been lost, you know. I said, how am I going to do this nightmare? How do I make the nightmares come alive? Well, the first was a boy. So I had him this direction. He was dreaming of a bear. Makwa! Right, so that was my first graphic, my first, what we call a graphic, a picture, right? Then the second one, a girl, she was sleeping like this, and she was dreaming of a guinea pig, of a snake. So I was able to embody the snake, find a graphic, a movement for the snake, and get it in my body. And then I had this little epiphany, improvising, about another boy. He was in the forest, and he comes across Wendigo, the cannibal. The boy was heard by the cannibal, was smelt by the cannibal, was hunted by the cannibal. The cannibal followed his tracks. The boy ran, but the Wendigo was big and strong and ran after the boy. The boy ran faster, but the Wendigo caught him. Wendigo! Wendigo! Wendigo. And I was able to bring that moment alive just through conjuring up the images through movement. The club, you know, the eating, the greasiness, the fact it was a hand that he was eating, things like that. And it made it vivid, made the nightmare come alive. And kids love to be scared. They love it. I mean, kids come up to me, I was scared during that story. I said, yes, but you were brave, weren't you? You listened to the whole thing. Yes, I was. It's how we share these stories that really brings the voices of the ancients to life for the next generation. That's why storytelling is powerful. It's an effect of animating things that have lain dormant for sometimes 1,000 years. And now suddenly they have breath and life and they exist. And if that happens, it can continue on, for generations. And the knowledge hidden in the metaphors comes forth. And whether the kids understand it at the time or not, or whether the adults understand it at the time or not, the metaphor lives in them somehow. And the teachings, go out. So that's what I have to say about that. Why don't I take some time for some questions from everybody? I know we're running short, so anybody? And who is?
I can check. I can check the chat. I wanted to mention that, when you describe this work, I think after 2 years of us having been home, and now the world is opening up and we're starting to go out, I really can't think of a better event to have you here today with us to help us connect with our bodies and to see the language, to understand some language around our body. So I just, yeah, so amazing.
And by the way, when you move, it affects the way you sound and changes the way your speech pattern happens and changes your inflection. So that's another reason why moving is so key.
Leland, this is Eldrina. Yes. I was wanting to know, do you, where do you live? I missed out on the intro. And also, do you teach movement to people? Like if I was interested in getting out of my comfort zone?
Yes, I do one-on-one coaching with people right here in my studio. And we have plans, of course, to do a little bit bigger workshops in the future when things truly open up more and people can hang out for a few days to develop ideas. But in the meantime, I run a monthly workshop out of my home here in Auburn, land of the Abenaki and the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet and Penobscot, and my cousins. I run a thing called the Kinetic Connection.
It's an online course, right? You put that in the chat.
Online course. I run it every month for 5 days. I have a lot of repeat actors who are working on material and trying to evolve their sketches or their ideas or their stories. I have a variety of people, mimes, magicians, storytellers, all trying to find that authentic voice and how they can, become the unique performer that we all are. And it's very much about personal style theater, the approach I do, because no one person is like another. You can't simply clone.
Right.
It's been tried before and it's failed.
Leland, are these 5 days sequential or is it once a week?
Yes. It's 5 days back to back. It's the first full week of the month. And I do it from 11:30 Eastern time, 11:30 Eastern time, which makes it a little early for those on the West Coast, but still doable. 11:30 to 1:30, 2 hours a day for 5 days. And it's very, very affordable. I only charge $100. I don't really do it. I don't do it for the money. I do it, because it's the work. And besides, when you teach, among other things, it keeps you from being lazy.
Yeah.
It's so amazing. I took maybe 3 or 4 times with Leland, and it's just so amazing. 2 hours every day, and Leland will teach you like the physical technique first hour. In last hour, you can bring your story piece, what you're working on, like whatever on any kind of level. Like if it's a perfected, that's fine to get feedback. But also like Leland is so great about if you start working on story, he has so much great eyes that if you get the private directing from Leland, it costs tons. But if you like Kinetic Connection, it's just has eyes for the work, how to be authentic to yourself, and that's what Tony's teaching is, and it's just amazing workshop. Like it really brings up your inner authenticity in you within a story, and I really recommend to take it if you love Leland's work.
Wonderful.
Yeah, what we'll do, we'll often go like beat by beat through somebody's work, and we do a process that we call mirroring, where we say just what we saw without commentary, without giving any kind of a critique of any kind. And then the second part is gifting, where we try and find ways to elevate the person's work. And whether it's a movement, a graphic, or a character concept, or a situation that you can create, all that sort of thing. So, for example, we have a guy right now who's working on the Emperor's New Clothes, and he's reinventing the story, and it's very appropriate for this period of time. Yeah. Go ahead, John. Put your hand up, John. Yeah. Can you unmute, John?
Sorry, I always forget that. So is this for somebody who has no background in mime whatsoever? This is fine. You get a little bit of general introduction as well as working on specifics?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's about personal style, finding your personal style. Fully being able to fully express yourself in your discipline, and of course how to be fun and how to entertain and how to engage, you know.
Mhm. Great.
That fine line of art and entertainment, you know.
I would add how to have fun in rehearsal.
Well, you know, rehearsal is fantastic. I look forward to the days, you know, when I have to go in and work out things. Sometimes it's very daunting and challenging, you know, like when the Marsh Theater asked me to create a new show based on Native American stories, and I had to go, oh, okay. Well, I had stories, you know. I had stories. I had stories from my tribe, and here's something that's very important that is different from a lot of other cultures. Native Americans, we get permission. We don't appropriate, you know. So if I do a story, I make sure I go to the story keeper, the tribal story keeper who's been doing that story, and I get permission, and I make sure that I'm allowed. That I don't have to do that, I guess, but it makes me feel like it feels right. So I get permission from like Bill Whippoorwill Thompson of the Lenape, or I get permission, you know, from the Abenaki storykeeper to share this story or that story. Then again, there are certain stories where I have to do all the research myself and stitch things together because they've been torn apart and scattered, and you can only find bits and pieces here and there, like a quilt.
Leland, people are asking for your website and what is the name of the course so they can look.
The name of the course is Kinetic Connection. If you friend me on Facebook, I put the notice up every month, and it's also available to be seen on the On Zoom platform, ON Zoom. It's part of Zoom, but it's an event. It's an event part of Zoom. Where you can, you know, advertise events and workshops and that sort of thing.
Wow.
On Zoom.
I did drop the only link that I could find. I'm not on Facebook anymore for various reasons, but I did drop the link on Zoom. But the only one that came up with was from February. But that should contain enough information for people to get in touch.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And if you have any issues, you can always drop me an email at leland@lelandfaulkner.com, and I'll respond.
Awesome. Well, anybody have a last question, a burning desire with our lovely fellow here with us?
Leland, thank you for your information. I'm going to really work hard these upcoming months to let my my stories come alive a little bit different than usual. So if any of you guys happen to see me anywhere, you can remind me. Aren't you supposed to move a little bit different, Drina?
Supposed would be a very bad word to use in that sentence.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll be moving it.
Yeah, it's so funny though, because when I am here in my element, it just naturally happens. But it's almost like when I go out there, it's a whole different person that comes out. It's almost like my grandmothers, you know, my uncles, my aunts that I remembered growing up. That's who I embody. And but yet that little feisty one wants to come out, and it's kind of like, wait, just later, you know, later.
Well,
later is now. Later is now.
Yeah, later is now. And you also mentioned that it was the animals that wanted to come out. You did earlier. You did not talk about you. You were talking about the animals want to come out. So you could just give them a little more oomph. Well, I want to thank Leland for being here today. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. It's just wonderful.
I want to end with a little sign, if you don't mind. This is it was taught to me. I'll pass it on to you. This is hand talk from the Native American Sign Language. It goes like this. You start by indicating yourself like this with your thumb. We use our thumb. We don't point at ourselves. That's kind of rude. You go like this. And you say here, indicating yourself. And then you take your eyes and you cast them out to the people that you're looking at. If it's multiple people, you cast them out to everybody. I do it to my whole audience. And then you touch your heart like this. And then you go like this. and you say, I see you. And in my heart, a sunrise.
The sunrise.
Poetry and movement, right?
Yeah. I see you. And in my heart, the sunrise. Excellent. Wonderful. Leland, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And
You're
I don't
so
know about
welcome,
anybody
everybody.
else, but I hope we find another time to get in the room with you, because this has really been fabulous. Thank you so much.
Well,
Thank
you're
you so
welcome.
much.
You're so welcome, everybody. It's been an
Angela.
honor sharing my thoughts with you.